The courtroom was packed that morning, the sound of murmurs bouncing off the old wooden panels that lined the walls, and all eyes were fixed on the solitary figure standing at the defense table. He was a man whose uniform spoke louder than words, his chest proudly bearing the Medal of Honor pinned over his heart, and yet today, that same medal had become the center of controversy. The tomb guard, a man known for his unwavering discipline and years of service protecting the most sacred symbol of sacrifice, the tomb of the unknown soldier, stood tall, unflinching even as whispers of doubt and curiosity filled the room. The judge, an older man with sharp features and a reputation for arrogance, peered down from the bench with a gaze that cut like steel. His voice boomed across the chamber, demanding silence, and then, with an almost mocking tone, he ordered the decorated soldier to remove his Medal of Honor, claiming that it was not a badge to wear in a courtroom, but a distraction, a piece of vanity that had no place in the solemnity of law. Gasps spread through the audience. No one had ever dared utter such words before, and even the attorneys looked shaken by the brazenness of the command. Yet the tomb guard did not immediately react. He simply fixed his gaze on the judge, his stance rigid but calm, the kind of composure only a man who had faced battle and unrelenting duty could maintain. The silence that followed was not one of submission but one of defiance, a silence that seemed to say more than any words ever could. As the order echoed in the chamber, people in the gallery leaned forward, some clutching the edges of the benches, waiting to see what this man of honor would do. To the judge, it may have been a simple assertion of authority, but to everyone else, it was an insult, not just to the soldier but to every man and woman who had worn the uniform and given their lives for freedom. The Medal of Honor was not jewelry, not a trophy, and certainly not vanity. It was the highest recognition of sacrifice and bravery, often earned in moments where life and death danced dangerously close. The tomb guard finally moved, but instead of reaching for his chest, he clasped his hands behind his back, his voice measured yet firm, and he spoke with a calmness that cut deeper than anger ever could. "This medal does not belong to me alone," he said, his words resonating through the quiet courtroom. "It belongs to every soldier who never came home, to the unknowns I stood watch over, to the families who received a folded flag instead of a son, a husband, or a father. And if you believe you have the right to strip me of it here, in this court, then you insult not just me, but the very sacrifice this nation stands upon." The courtroom grew so quiet that even the faint ticking of the clock seemed deafening. The judge's face flushed red, partly from anger and partly from the realization that his words had turned the entire room against him. Yet still, driven by ego and a need to assert dominance, he leaned forward and repeated the order, his voice harsher now, warning the guard that refusal would result in contempt of court. The tension was unbearable, each second stretching like an eternity as the two men stared at each other, one armed with the law, the other with honor. A woman seated in the front row, herself a widow of a veteran, could no longer contain her outrage and stood up, her voice trembling but resolute as she declared that the judge's demand was a disgrace. Soon after, murmurs became words, words became shouts, and in a matter of moments the courtroom transformed into a storm of indignation, with veterans, family members, and ordinary citizens rising to their feet, defending the tomb guard. Even the bailiffs shifted, uncomfortably, unsure whether to silence the crowd or to stand with them. The judge banged his gavel furiously, calling for order, but his commands seemed to grow weaker with each strike, drowned out by the voices of the people who understood the weight of that medal better than he ever could. The tomb guard remained still, almost statuesque, as though he were back at his post at Arlington, unmoved by the chaos but deeply aware of the storm his presence had ignited. His calmness in the face of humiliation only added fuel to the crowd's defense of him, and slowly, the judge realized he was losing control of the courtroom he once commanded with an iron fist. Yet still, pride chained him to his decision, and he threatened not only to hold the tomb guard in contempt but to have him forcibly stripped of the medal if he did not comply immediately. That statement silenced the room, not because the people agreed, but because the audacity of such a threat was beyond comprehension. Then came the moment that shifted the entire atmosphere. The double doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and in walked a tall man in full military dress, his chest adorned with stars that spoke of decades of service. A hush fell over the room as everyone turned to see who had entered, and when it became clear that a high-ranking colonel had arrived, the silence was suffocating. He strode confidently toward the defense table, his polished shoes striking the floor like the rhythm of a drum, and stopped just beside the tomb guard. Without needing permission to speak, his voice thundered across the room. "Judge, do you understand what you are asking?" His words were not just spoken but charged with authority that came from more than rank, it came from respect earned on countless battlefields. The judge stammered, trying to reassert control, but the colonel cut him off sharply. This man's Medal of Honor is not for you to strip. It is a symbol of a nation's gratitude, a recognition that cannot be revoked by arrogance or ego. If you believe you have that power, then you have misunderstood both the law and the weight of sacrifice. The audience erupted into applause, their claps echoing like thunder, and for the first time, the judge's gavel seemed useless, his shouts drowned out by the will of the people and the presence of true authority in the room. The tomb guard glanced briefly at the colonel, their eyes locking in silent understanding, two soldiers bound not just by rank but by shared values and loyalty that transcended the courtroom. The judge's face twisted with frustration, his pride unwilling to yield even in the face of overwhelming opposition, and yet there was no mistaking the tremor in his voice as he tried to regain control. "This is my courtroom," he shouted, "and I will not be undermined." But his declaration rang hollow, empty of conviction, and the crowd knew it. The colonel took a step forward, his tone calm yet dangerously sharp, and he reminded the judge that a courtroom was a place of justice, not tyranny. "You sit on that bench not to wield power for yourself, but to uphold the law with fairness and respect," the colonel said, his voice unwavering. "And today, you have disrespected not only the man before you but every soldier who ever laid down his life for this country." The gallery erupted once more, their cheers filling every corner, while the tomb guard finally broke his silence with a single line that left the entire courtroom breathless. "You can take this medal off my chest, but you can never strip the honor it represents." The words struck like lightning, and in that instant, the balance of power shifted. The judge, realizing that he had not only lost control but lost the respect of everyone in the room, sank back into his chair, his gavel slipping from his grip. The people knew this was not the end, the reckoning for his arrogance had only begun. But one thing was certain, the tomb guard had not only defended his medal but had reminded everyone of the sacredness it carried, and now, the judge himself was about to pay the price for forgetting that truth.